Iran on the brink. Nuclear talks begin as Trump's war machine gathers. We're witnessing what could be the final moments before a catastrophic conflict in the Middle East. Iran's president has just ordered the start of nuclear negotiations with the United States, and the timing couldn't be more critical. This announcement came mere hours after President Trump declared he was hopeful about reaching a deal that could prevent military action against the Islamic Republic. But make no mistake, this isn't diplomacy as usual. This is negotiation under the shadow of an imminent war. Let me be absolutely clear about what's happening right now. The United States has threatened full-scale military action in response to widespread anti-government protests that have swept across Iran, protests that have claimed thousands of lives. Iran's leadership isn't calling this civil unrest. They're calling it a coup attempt. And Trump's response? He's assembled what he himself describes as a massive naval and air armada in the Gulf, a show of force designed to intimidate, to threaten, and quite possibly to attack. The question everyone's asking, are these talks real, or are they just theater before the bombs start falling? I'm here to break down what's really happening, because the official statements don't tell you the whole story. Our colleague Barbara Plett-Usher is on the ground in Doha, and what she's reporting should alarm anyone who cares about Middle East stability. This is the first official confirmation from Iran that talks will actually happen. But here's the catch, and it's a massive one. Iran's president made it clear these negotiations are conditional. He said they should proceed if the environment is right, if it's free from threats, and free from unreasonable expectations. Let's decode that diplomatic language because it reveals everything about how precarious this situation really is. Free from threats. That's Iran saying they won't negotiate while American warships and bombers circle their borders like vultures. And who can blame them? Think about it. Would you sit down for serious negotiations while someone holds a gun to your head? That's essentially what Trump is demanding. He wants Iran to come to the table while simultaneously preparing to strike them. It's negotiation as hostage taking. And those unreasonable expectations Iran mentioned, that's where things get really complicated and where this whole diplomatic effort could collapse before it even begins. The Americans have made their position crystal clear, and it's not pretty. They want this deal to cover far more than just Iran's nuclear program. They're demanding Iran abandon its support for militant groups across the region. Groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, various militias in Iraq and Syria. They want Iran to dismantle its ballistic missile program, which Iran considers its primary defensive deterrent. In other words, the United States is asking Iran to voluntarily strip itself of every tool it has to defend itself or project power in its own region. Iran has responded with equal clarity. That's absolutely not up for negotiation. Their position is simple. These talks should focus exclusively on the nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Everything else is off the table. Period. Fine. So we have a fundamental disconnect here. The Americans want comprehensive surrender disguised as a comprehensive deal. The Iranians want limited focused negotiations on nuclear issues only. How do you bridge that gap? How do you square that circle? Nobody seems to have an answer, and that's terrifying given what's at stake. But despite all these obstacles, despite the fundamental disagreements, despite the deep mutual distrust, the talks are apparently going ahead. The expectation is that they'll meet on Friday in Turkey. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi will sit down with Steve Witkoff, the U.S. Special Envoy. The location itself is significant. Turkey, a NATO member, but also a country that maintains working relationships with Iran. Neutral ground, or at least as neutral as you can get in this region. What's fascinating about how this came together is the behind-the-scenes diplomacy. This wasn't arranged by Washington and Tehran directly. They don't trust each other enough for that. Instead, regional powers stepped in to play mediator. Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, and Oman have been working overtime to set this up, to create the conditions where both sides could at least sit in the same room without immediately walking out. And here's something crucial that Iran's president said in his statement. They decided to participate because they were responding to requests from friendly countries. That phrase tells you everything about the depth of Iranian suspicion toward the United States. They're not doing this because they trust America. They're doing it because their regional partners, countries they actually have relationships with, are begging them to try. And why wouldn't Iran be suspicious? Let's talk about what happened last June.
because it casts a long, dark shadow over these upcoming talks. The United States bombed Iranian nuclear facilities, not during a crisis, not in response to an attack. They bombed Iran on the eve of scheduled negotiations. Think about the message that sends. The Americans were literally preparing to sit down for talks, and at the same moment, they were loading bombs onto aircraft to strike Iranian targets. That's not diplomacy. That's betrayal. That's telling your opponent you can't be trusted, that your word means nothing, that even the promise of negotiation is just tactical deception. So when Iran says these talks must be free from threats, they're thinking about June. They're thinking about sitting down in good faith, only to have cruise missiles strike their territory hours later. The Iranians have learned from that experience, and they've adjusted their strategy accordingly. Iran's top military commander recently gave a statement that should send chills down the spine of any American war planner. He admitted they responded too slowly to the June attacks. He said they had been operating from a defensive posture, but no longer. Iran has now shifted, in his words, to an offensive strategy. What does that mean in practical terms? It means if the United States strikes Iran, the response won't be measured. It won't be proportional. It won't be limited to Iranian territory. Iran is prepared to hit back hard.
You hit back fast and hit back everywhere. We're talking about attacks on U.S. bases across the region, attacks on Gulf shipping, potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz, missile strikes on Saudi oil facilities, activation of proxy forces from Lebanon to Iraq to Yemen. The entire Middle East could explode within hours. I spoke with Professor Fawaz Gerges, a leading expert on international politics at the London School of Economics, who has written extensively about this region, and his assessment was stark. He said without hesitation, Iran is going to negotiate while under threat of war. That's the reality. Trump has deployed massive naval and air forces to the Gulf. He's openly discussed regime change in Tehran. And Iran? Iran is facing severe social and economic problems at home.
With large portions of the population expressing grievances that have erupted into deadly protests. All of Iran's choices right now are bad, but negotiating under threat might be the least bad option available. Professor Gerges told me something that should wake everyone up. If and when this meeting happens in Istanbul, and note that the Americans still haven't officially confirmed it's happening on Friday, this will be the last chance for de-escalation. His assessment of the risk of war, 6 or 7 out of 10. That's not a distant possibility. That's not a theoretical scenario. That's a coin flip away from regional catastrophe. Let's be brutally honest about what President Trump is demanding from Iran, because the professor didn't mince words. What Trump is demanding is surrender.
I'll literally surrender. Think about it from Iran's perspective. They're being asked to shut down their nuclear program entirely. They're being asked to dismantle their ballistic missile arsenal, the only credible deterrent they have against vastly superior American and Israeli military power. They're being asked to abandon their regional allies, cutting off support to groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. If Iran accepts all of this, what's left? A neutered state with no ability to defend itself, no ability to project influence in its own neighborhood, no leverage against enemies who have repeatedly threatened to destroy it. The professor was direct. It means the end of the regime. It's a great humiliation. And that's exactly why the Iranians insist on limiting these talks to nuclear issues only. Their ballistic missiles?
That's deterrence. That's survival. Their regional alliances? That's strategic depth. That's security. Those aren't negotiable, not because Iran is being stubborn, but because giving them up would be national suicide. This is where regional mediators like Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, and Oman are trying to work magic. They're attempting to find a framework that separates these various issues. Maybe you can make progress on nuclear questions without immediately tackling missiles and regional proxies. Maybe you can sequence things, build trust incrementally. But that's going to be incredibly difficult when one side wants everything immediately, and the other side is drawing bright red lines. And looming over all of this is Israel.
The professor pointed out what many analysts suspect. The United States is coordinating extremely closely with the Israelis on this, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has his own agenda. Netanyahu doesn't just want Iran's nuclear program shut down. He wants strict limits on Iranian ballistic missiles because Israel views Iran's missile capability as a major strategic threat, one that could potentially overwhelm Israeli air defenses in any future conflict. So, We have to wait and see if Trump will actually agree to narrow the scope of these talks to focus primarily on nuclear issues. Can he resist the pressure from Netanyahu? Can he resist his own instincts toward maximalist demands? That remains to be seen. Here's something significant that Professor Gerges revealed. Iran has already indicated willingness to make painful concessions. They've suggested they might shut down their nuclear program or at least suspend enrichment activities. They've even discussed shipping their enriched uranium to Russia, exactly as they did under the 2015 nuclear deal that Trump abandoned. Iran is trying to show flexibility, trying to create space for a deal. But the professor identified the critical question that will determine whether we get diplomacy or war. Does President Trump believe Iran is vulnerable right now? Does he think Iran is on its knees? Does he see this moment, with protests raging, the economy struggling, international pressure mounting, as a golden opportunity to strike a fatal blow against the regime? If Trump thinks that way, if his advisors are telling him Iran is weak and this is the moment to finish them off, then we're heading for disaster. And the professor drew a chilling parallel. This could be a major miscalculation, just like the miscalculation Americans made in 2003 when they invaded Iraq. Remember how that turned out? The promises of a quick war, easy victory, grateful populations, welcoming American liberators. We got 2 decades of chaos, hundreds of thousands dead, trillions of dollars wasted, and a region more unstable than ever. Iraq was supposed to be the easy case, a weakened dictator, a military hollowed out by sanctions, ethnic and religious divisions the Americans thought they could exploit. Iran is infinitely more complicated. It is 3 times larger by population. It's far more mountainous and difficult terrain. Its military, while not as advanced as America's, is competent, motivated, and has been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. Its regional proxy network gives it the ability to strike back across the entire Middle East. And unlike Saddam's Iraq, Iran has genuine popular nationalism that could rally the population against foreign attack, even if they hate their own government. So if Trump thinks attacking Iran will be quick and easy, if he thinks regime change can be accomplished with a few weeks of airstrikes, he's deluding himself. And more importantly, he's setting up the United States for a catastrophic failure that will make Iraq look like a minor mistake. As I'm reporting this to you right now, the situation is incredibly fluid. We're in that dangerous space where both sides are preparing for war while simultaneously preparing for peace. Iranian military commanders are moving forces, hardening facilities, preparing their population for potential strikes. American carriers are positioning. Aircraft are being staged at forward bases. Targeting packages are being developed. And in the middle of all this military preparation, diplomats are supposed to sit down in Istanbul on Friday and find a peaceful solution. Can it work? The odds aren't good. The gaps between the two sides are enormous. The mistrust is deep and well-earned on both sides. The domestic political pressures, Trump needing to look strong, Iranian leaders unable to appear weak in front of their population. All push toward confrontation rather than compromise.
But the alternative is so terrible that we have to hope diplomacy succeeds. A war between the United States and Iran wouldn't be contained. It wouldn't be clean. It would devastate the region, send oil prices skyrocketing, potentially draw in other powers, and create humanitarian catastrophe on a scale we haven't seen in decades. The talks in Turkey on Friday aren't just another round of negotiations. They're potentially the last off ramp before a disaster that would reshape the Middle East for generations. President Trump says he's hopeful about a deal. Iran says it's willing to talk under the right conditions. Regional mediators are working desperately to bridge the gaps, but hope isn't a strategy, and willingness to talk isn't the same as willingness to compromise.
We're about to find out if these two adversaries can step back from the brink, or if we're witnessing the final diplomatic theater before the curtain rises on another Middle East war. The world is holding its breath. Friday in Istanbul might determine whether we breathe easier or prepare for the worst. And right now, with everything I'm seeing, everything I'm hearing from experts and officials, I wouldn't bet on peace, but I'm desperately hoping I'm wrong. This is the reality of where we stand, on the edge of catastrophe, with diplomacy as our only hope, and that hope growing thinner by the hour.